an engine whose reputation has been intentionally ruined by Thomas's current copyright owners. Rebecca, the yellow Bulleid Pacific, is a big, cheerful locomotive that is now one of the largest and strongest mixed traffic engines to work on the island, operating services ranging from top-line expresses to slow, heavy goods work. And because of yours truly, she'd gain a much-deserved lease of life when her first story was told in a more classic series style. The story of Rebecca begins with her larger cousins, the merchant navies, whose stories go back to the 1930s, as whilst the Southern Railway of the mainland was putting forward plans to electrify many of its lines with their standard 750-volt DC third rail system, it was failing to maintain its fleet of steam locomotives used on top-line expresses beyond the electric multiple units use, with many of them dating back to the end of the First World War, such as Richard and the N15 King Arthurs of the former London and South Western Railway, and the Southern had continued to build until 1927, and the more recent but inefficient Lord Nelsons. In 1937, both the Southern's general manager and chief mechanical engineer, Sir Herbert Walker and Richard Maunsell, retired from the company, and was replaced by Gilbert Slumper and Oliver von Snell Bulleid, respectively, with the former tasking the latter to design a new fleet of express passenger locomotives as quickly as possible. Bulleid himself was born on September 19, 1882 in New Zealand, and started off his railway career at the age of 18 on the Great Northern Railway in 1901 as an apprentice to Chief Mechanical Engineer Sir Henry A. Ivett. Following a brief turn of leave, which included a trip to Paris, he rejoined the GNR in 1905, this time as an assistant to the new CME Sir Nigel Gresley. Bulleid's position remained more or less the same, following the Great Northern becoming part of the London North Eastern Railway in 1923, and he'd get a hand in developing many of Gresley's locomotive designs, including the P1 Mikado heavy goods engine, the U1 Banking Garrett, Victorion's loco mode basis with the P2 Mikado express engines, and, officially the world's fastest steam locomotives, the streamlined A4 Pacifics, until he eventually moved to the Southern to replace Maunsell as chief mechanical engineer. What Bulleid designed was interesting to say the least, initially considering a 482 mountain type for use on the heavy Golden Hour night ferry boat trains, before this was revised to the same wheel arrangement as the Gresley P1 and P2s, until finally, when both 8-coupled loco proposals were rejected by the Southern's chief civil engineer, settling on a 462 Pacific type. The new engines would be given many unique features, including a chain-driven valve gear encased in an oil bath as a result of wartime material shortages, steam-operated brakes with 2 brake blocks between the center driving wheels, and the more conventional one on the other pairs of wheels, lighter Bulleid Firth Brown 6-foot 2-inch diameter driving wheels inspired by the Boxpox wheels over in the US, and the size of those on the P2s, electric lighting on the loco and footplate for easier nighttime operations, a steam-run treadle to open the firebox doors when shoveling coal, an all-weather cab to improve the in-cab environment during the cold months of winter, a cheaper-to-build, fully welded firebox, and, of course, the air-smooth casing, which wasn't done as streamlining since the locos had flat fronts. Whilst the new engines were to be express engines, the outbreak of World War II on September 1st, 1939 resulted in economic restrictions to develop them, and to avoid this, Bulleid allocated them as mixed-traffic locomotives. On February 18th, 1941, the first member of the new engines, 21C1 Channel Packet, rolled out of the Eastleigh Works, with the loco being named at a ceremony on March 10th, and 9 more will be built by the time production ended for the first batch in July 1942, and all will be named after shipping lines the Southern Railways served, such as Canadian Pacific, in reference to the shipping line instead of the Canadian Pacific Railway. By 1943, the pilot merchant navies were used on express trains to Southampton, Exeter, Dover, and Bournemouth, but due to their bulk, the locomotives could only be used on trunk ones east and west of London as a result of lack of maintenance on the line due to wartime rationing, with this concern being a factor in the development of Neville and his family of the controversial-looking Q1060 goods engines. Taking this into account, Bulleid eventually started work on a scaled-down version of the merchant navies, which included a weight reduction to 77 tons, and the intention for this new fleet to run throughout the west of England and the coast of Kent. The construction was undertaken at Brighton Works due to Eastleigh being at capacity with a second batch of merchant navies, although 6 of these engines would be built at the merchant navy's birthplace. With World War II's end in Europe in May 1945, the first member of this new lighter Pacific, 21C101, rolled out of the Brighton workshops, and was christened Exeter on July 10th in the bay platforms of Exeter Central Station, and construction of the 110 locomotive fleet would carry on until January 1951, and were either named after towns in the West Country, or known references to the Battle of Britain during World War II, such as Royal Air Force bases and squadrons, or even individuals such as Winston Churchill. Merchant Navy production would comprise 30 locos when production ended in April 1949, and in January 1946, engine 21C122 would roll out of Brighton and be christened the name Exmoor, although during her construction, she quickly gained the nickname Rebecca in reference to one of the workmen's daughters, due to her cheerful nature for being assembled as she found some of the work ticklish. Rebecca's first shed allocation was at 9 Elms, where she ran local passenger trains out of London Waterloo, though she'd occasionally pull top-line expresses and boat trains such as the Golden Arrow and Night Ferry. In 1948, with the Big Four effectively bankrupt, the government decided nationalisation was the way to get the industry back on its feet, resulting in the formation of British Railways, and the merchant navies and light Pacifics would all be renumbered as engines 35001 to 35030 and 34001 to 34110 respectively, with Rebecca's new number being 34022. During the early years of BR, nothing much changed for Rebecca in terms of her operations, with her still working local boat trains and occasionally top-line expresses to places such as Southampton Docks, where she'd encounter Thomas's family of the former London, Brighton and South Coast Railway E2s, which were not quite the opposite of Thomas's reliability, and Rosie and some of her family of the USATC S100s or USA tanks, though she'd eventually be repainted from the bright malachite green into the darker Great Western-inspired Brunswick green. However, like all the Bulleid Pacifics in their original forms, Rebecca had a high fuel consumption and tended to suffer from wheel slip when starting off due to her oil bath being fed more oil than what was needed, where the excess would drip onto the locomotive's wheels and cause them to slip. Thankfully, due to careful handling from her regular crews, she wouldn't suffer a casing fire, which, contrary to popular belief, was put down to braking too hard to stop from the original brake blocks. In 1952, Rebecca was reallocated to Bath Green Park on the late-lamented Somerset and Dorset Joint Railway, where she'd continue hauling local passenger traffic along with some turns handling goods trains, where it was found the trucks enjoyed her being their engine, as opposed to the many engines who worked with them due to issues controlling their emotions. On April 24, 1953, Cousin Merchant Navy 35020 Bibby Line, on the approach to Crooken Station, suffered a crank axle failure, which caused the coupling rod to damage the platform and canopy roof. An investigation into the accident putting it down to metal fatigue within the locomotives, which would lead to all Bulleid Pacifics, including Rebecca, to be removed from traffic for the fitting of new crank axles. Following this incident, Brighton's chief technical assistant of the locomotive department, Ronald Guy Jarvis, drew up plans for rebuilding of the Bulleid Pacifics into a more conventional layout, to which Bulleid himself had opposed despite his resignation from the Southern prior to nationalisation. Jarvis's design work included removal of the air-smooth casing and steam-powered reverser, replacing the latter with a screw equivalent, and the implementation of 3 satisfying sets of Walshart's valve gear on all the cylinders, with the 1st Merchant Navy 35018 British India Line and Light Pacific 34005 Barnstable being the first of their classes to be given this treatment in 1956 and 57 respectively. In December 1957, Rebecca's turn would come for rebuilding, but the trip would be stalled when an engine broke down whilst departing Bath Green Park with a passenger train to Temple Combe, and as a result of saving the passengers from the situation, Rebecca would never be rebuilt into this new look. At around the same time Rebecca was supposed to be rebuilt, one of her family members was involved in the tragic Lewisham rail crash, when on the evening of a foggy December 4th, 1957, Battle of Britain number 34066, Spitfire, whilst running a service from Camp Street to Folkestone, collided with a pair of Class 415 or 4 EPBs and a single two-car Class 416 or 2 EPBs after failing to stop at a signal, resulting in the collapse of the bridge above them, and sadly 90 deaths and 173 injuries, along with both cars of the Class 416, a car of one of the Class 415s, and even one coach of Spitfire's train that had been killed from being telescoped by the coach behind her. Following an investigation into the Mainland's third worst rail disaster, Spitfire's involvement was put down to the small front cab window on the casing, even though many unrebuilt Bulleid Pacifics had been given a modified wedge-shaped cab to help improve the front-facing window space, the light draft from his exhaust system, the lack of visibility due to the fog, the fact the engine was driven on the left instead of the right, and the lack of the automatic warning system or AWS on the southeastern main line. With Rebecca avoiding her rebuild on purpose, the total of rebuilt Light Pacific engines will be 59 by the time the program ceased in 1961 as a result of the modernization plan put out by the Other Railways Board under Anthony Eden's Conservative government 6 years earlier back in 1955, though all 30 of the merchant navies will be given this treatment by 1960. With the Kent Coast electrification being approved by the Other Railways Board, Rebecca would be allocated to Exmouth Junction to work trains west of Salisbury, eventually coming under the management of the Western region in September 1962, with some runs including ones on the South West Main Line before it was stripped down to a single-tracked secondary railway. Even with the end of Southern Steam approaching, Rebecca's family had some special moments. Perhaps the most notable was on January 30th, 1965, when Battle of Britain 34051, Winston Churchill, hauled his namesake's funeral train. Other noteworthy achievements include periods of the rebuilt merchant navies hitting 100 miles an hour before the end of steam, when on June 27, 1967, engine 35003, Royal Mail, also known as Annabelle, was hauling a small rig of 3 coaches and 2 parcels vans, when she hit 105.88 miles an hour between mileposts 38 and 37 between Weymouth and London Waterloo. Annabelle would thus be the Mainland's last steam engine to hit the 3-figure mark on the speedometer for almost half a century, until the early morning hours of April 12, 2017, when LNER Peppercorn A1 new build number 60163 Tornado hit 101.6 miles an hour during a trial run on the East Coast Main Line between Newcastle and York, making him the world's second fastest steam locomotive in the 21st century, surpassed by Germany's former Deutsche Reichsbahn nameless one of Class 18 number 201. Who regularly runs rail tours at 110 miles an hour. Rebecca would carry on with runs out of Exmouth Junction until, with the introduction of Bear and the other D7000 High-Mechs, and Diesel 10 and the other D800 warships, she was withdrawn from service on March 25, 1965, and the final of her kin, West Country 34021 Dartmoor, would be withdrawn on the final day of steam of the southern region on July 9, 1967, when they returned to the sheds of Nine Elms after hauling a Southampton boat train. Once removed from traffic, Rebecca, like Murdoch, was sent to the Woodham Brothers scrapyard in Barry, South Wales, but due to the company finding it more profitable to scrap trucks, they never really got round to scrapping many of the engines, allowing preservationists the opportunity to save almost 300 steam engines. Rebecca would be one of these lucky locos when in 1977, her old crew, who'd moved to Sodor to keep working on steam engines, approached the Northwestern Railway's controller, Sir Charles Topham Hatt, to save her for assistance in helping Richard and Bear with the boat train due to an increase in passenger numbers for that service. Whilst Bear took less time to get ready, Richard was arguably stronger than him, but by the end of the 1970s, both the High-Mech and N15 were unable to keep up with increasing demand. The VAT controller would thus agree to the crew's request, and in 1979, Rebecca became another one of several West Country and Battle of Britain locos to be rescued from the scrapyard. Upon finalization of the purchase, she was taken to Sodor's Croving Gates Works for restoration, with contract for replacement boiler tubes going to the island's ironworks at Kildane, whilst other workmen worked on restoring the rest of the locomotive, giving rise to a new number, 22, and the Bulleid Pacific's current mostly yellow livery, which she chose when she asked how many engines were in unique colours, as the only other yellow engine was Molly, a Claude Hamilton from the former Great Eastern Railway. As for work on the restoration, this ranged from the rebuild and replacement of springs to the construction of an all-new tender, as the original was lost at Woodham's, whilst the boiler work included a complete replacement of the firebox, to which Sodor would build relatively quickly. Meanwhile, another 31 members of Rebecca's family would be saved throughout the years, with some bought directly from the other railway, including Merchant Navy 35028 Clan Line, West Country 34023 Blackmore Vale, and Battle of Britain 34051 Winston Churchill, by two separate groups of volunteers and the National Collection respectively. The other survivors came from Woodham's scrapyard, and now range from operational to awaiting restoration, with the other 20 survivors of Rebecca's direct relatives having half of them in their original shape with the air-smooth casing, and the other half are in the more conventional look. In terms of the 11 merchant navies, some notable members include the second-to-last engine built, and the youngest preserved, 35029 Element Lines, who was saved from Woodlands by the National Railway Museum in January 1974, and is now displayed with segments of her chopped off to show visitors the internal workings of a steam locomotive. The other notable engine is 35011 General Steam Navigation, who was privately rescued from Woodham's in March 1983 and moved to Brighton's Preston Park before later being moved to the Royal Air Force's Binbrook base in Lincolnshire until 2007, when he was moved to Willerton on the West Somerset Railway. In 2009, the locomotive reunited with his sister, 35025 Brocklebank Line, when he was transferred to a private site at Sellinge in Kent, where initial restoration was carried out on both engines, but little progress was made. General remained in the field with Brocklebank until 2016, when he was acquired by the General Steam Navigation Locomotive Restoration Society and moved to the Swindon and Cricklade Railway for a proper restoration. Albeit, unlike the other merchant navies around today, the current owners of GSN intend to restore him back into his original condition, with the air-smooth casing and chain-driven valve gear, due to the fact none of the merchant navies survived in their old shapes, making this a unique restoration that, whilst it's restoring an old steam locomotive, it's also bringing back a sort of extinct design with modern technology. As for Brocklebank Line, she's since remained in the field, but in 2020, following discussion the previous year, she consented to her original owners of the Brocklebank Line Association in being sold to Southern Locomotives Limited, where a more official restoration is now starting off, in addition to Southern Locomotives' other two Light Pacifics under restoration, in the forms of rebuilt West Country 34010 Sidmouth, and also rebuilt Battle of Britain 34058 Sir Frederick Pyle. Eventually, after 2 years of hard work, Rebecca seen for the first time in preservation in 1981, but as she travelled to Tidmouth to properly meet the Fat Controller's other engines, it was discovered her brake lines had been improperly assembled, but due to a backlog of work in the shops, Rebecca would be unable to get her brakes mended for the next several days, during which several incidents would occur, including one where an entire coal train pushed her down Gordon's Hill, but disaster was thankfully averted when Rosie managed to bring the runaway to a halt. Since officially becoming part of the NWR, Rebecca has undergone many changes, including some periods when her front's painted black and the buffer beam painted white to give a more classic look. And in terms of her work, alongside running the boat train, other duties include turns on the express if Gordon was unavailable, local commuter traffic, and regular heavy goods, although one addition in recent decades has been long-distance intermodal traffic, making her one of several steam engines used on this duty, alongside Peter and Murdoch, in XLMS-8F and BR-9F respectively. In summary, Rebecca, despite the hatred many have towards her, is not who they all think she is, as whilst her Sodor career might have been rough from the beginning, she's pulled through every single time, and despite what detractors say about her, she is, in the eyes of the Fat Controller, the other engines, and the rest of the island's people, as a really useful engine.